I was on the night shift at the hospital when I was informed that two patients had been rushed to the emergency room. To my shock, it was my husband and my daughter-in-law. I called my son to ask about her, and he told me she went to take care of her sick mother. I smiled coldly and began to plan. When they wake up, the truth will be right in front of them. But before I continue, check if you've subscribed to the channel and share in the comments where you are watching us from. We would love to know how far our stories of revenge reach. The wall clock in the nurses' station read 11:45 at night. My body felt completely spent. After the second consecutive shift, my legs were already protesting, and my eyelids felt heavy. I just wanted to finish work as soon as possible, go back home, throw myself onto my usual bed, and fall asleep. Los Angeles at night was truly quiet. The only sounds were the insects outside the window and the rustling of the papers the young nurse was turning as she wrote up the files. That calm was suddenly broken. In the distance, a familiar sound, one that always squeezed my heart, rang out again. An ambulance siren. And not just one, but two ambulances arrived at the hospital courtyard almost simultaneously. The brakes squealed with a dry, sharp noise, announcing that another long night had just begun. "We have a serious accident," said Dr. Peterson, the respected head of the emergency room with grey hair, from his office. I didn't need him to tell me. The instinct of a head nurse made me stand up immediately, forgetting all my exhaustion. We practically ran toward the main door, ready for the worst. The emergency doors flew open, the medical staff pushed the first gurney inside, everyone with tense faces. One of them yelled in a hurried voice, "Female patient, around 30 years old, fractured left femur, multiple soft tissue injuries, possible traumatic brain injury. Blood pressure is dropping fast." I took a quick look at the woman. Her beautiful chestnut hair was matted with blood, covering part of her face. The dress she was wearing was torn, revealing bruises and scrapes. But what made me frown was another smell, not the smell of blood. A strong odor of alcohol hit me right in the nose. Just as the first gurney passed, the second one came in right behind it. Male patient, around 60 years old, severe head trauma, unconscious, possible internal hemorrhage. My gaze immediately shifted to the still man, and then my entire body froze. I felt as if someone was forcefully squeezing my heart. The blue checkered shirt, the straight lines, the well-ironed collar. It was the shirt I myself had carefully ironed for my husband, Robert, barely 3 days earlier. I felt my blood stop circulating. A cold wave of panic ran down my spine. My eyes returned desperately to the woman on the first gurney. I tried to look through the dried blood and swollen bruises. Those lips, the bridge of that nose. My God, it was Clara, my daughter-in-law. The world around me spun. "Angie!" A firm hand vigorously shook my shoulder. "Angie, we don't have much time." Dr. Peterson's tough voice pulled me out of the abyss of shock. I looked him in the eyes and saw urgency and confidence in them. This was not the time to be a wife or a mother-in-law. It was time to be the head nurse, Angie. I took a deep breath, swallowing the panic that threatened to rise in my throat. My mind, trained by decades of experience, took control. I walked toward Robert's gurney and began reading his vital signs on the monitor. My voice came out clear, firm, and professional. Without the slightest tremor, both were rushed to adjacent operating rooms. "Angie, you're in charge of this case," ordered Dr. Peterson. I nodded without saying anything. Under the intense white light of the operating room, the outside world disappeared. All that remained were the constant beeping of the machines, the metallic sound of the instruments, and Dr. Peterson's short orders. I was across from him, with my husband's open body between us. My hands worked like a machine. I handed him every instrument at the exact moment, without hesitation. And then, the most terrifying moment arrived. The constant beeping of the heart monitor suddenly stopped, replaced by a long, continuous, sad, and desperate sound. The electrocardiogram line on the screen had gone completely flat. Robert's heart had stopped beating. "No pulse! Defibrillator! Fast, Angie!" shouted Dr. Peterson, his voice cutting through the alarm. I didn't hesitate for a second. I turned, charged the defibrillator, and felt the weight of the two paddles in my hands. I placed them on the bare chest of the man with whom I had shared more than 30 years of my life. "Fire!" yelled Peterson. I pressed the button. A dry sound. Thump! It echoed as his body lifted from the table due to the electric shock. We all held our breath, eyes fixed on the screen. The line was still flat. I charged the defibrillator again. Another shock. And then, in the midst of a suffocating silence, a faint beep broke the air. Then another. The line on the screen began to move again, forming small waves. The heart had started beating again. The surgery continued. Almost 5 hours passed, long as a century. When Dr. Peterson made the last stitch and took off his gloves, the sun was already rising outside. Clara's operation, in the room next door, had also just finished. "We did it," he told me, patting my shoulder, his voice tired but relieved. "They are out of danger, Angie." As soon as I heard those words, the professional wall I had maintained completely collapsed. I took a step back, leaning against the cold tile wall, feeling my legs give out. But between the horror and the exhaustion, an immense peace washed over me. Thank God they were still alive, my husband and my daughter-in-law, both safe. When Robert and Clara were moved to the intensive care unit, I started the usual work of a nurse after an emergency, collecting the patient's belongings. I began with Clara's things. A young nurse had brought them in on a metal tray. Her small beige suede purse was covered in mud and had a spot of dried blood. I put on gloves and carefully opened it. Inside was a wallet with a few loose dollars, a ruby red lipstick broken in half, and a cell phone with a shattered screen, cracked like an irreparable spiderweb. I put everything into a sealed bag with her name. Then I moved on to Robert's things. A colleague wheeled in the cart with his clothes, his worn leather jacket, which he was always proud of, and grey pants. I picked up the jacket and checked the outer pockets out of habit. In the right one, the bunch of house keys. In the left one, his old leather wallet, worn at the corners, the gift I gave him for our 20th anniversary. Then I reached into the inside pocket, that small compartment where he used to keep important things. My fingers touched something unfamiliar. It wasn't the pen he always carried. I felt a stiff piece of paper and a small rectangular object. Curiosity mingled with a dark premonition. I slowly pulled out the objects and placed them on the metal table. The first was a receipt. The white light of the operating room illuminated the printed text. The Hidden Kiss Inn. It was a small, ill-reputed motel on the outskirts of town, where people usually went for less than decent reasons. I looked down at the date. It was yesterday, and my eyes stopped at the line that read, "Checkout time, 9 p.m, barely 2 hours before the accident." Trembling, I picked up the second object, a box of condoms. The plastic wrapper was torn. I turned the box. The lid opened. Inside, an empty space. I felt the world stop, but the hell wasn't over yet. The last object fell out of the pocket, a small vial of perfume, one of those samples they give away in stores. The cap wasn't closed properly, and a sweet, penetrating aroma spread in the air, displacing the hospital disinfectant smell. I didn't need to look at the label to know what perfume it was. I know that smell. I've smelled it hundreds of times in my own house. It is the scent of Rose Garden, Clara's favorite perfume. The same one my son Ryan gave her for their wedding anniversary. The sealed bag with Robert's belongings slipped from my hands and fell onto the cold tile floor. A dry thump echoed, followed by the metallic sound of the objects rolling. The motel receipt, a box of used condoms, my daughter-in-law's perfume bottle. There they were, displaying their betrayal under the impassive hospital light. I crouched down to pick them up one by one, my hands trembling so much I could barely hold them. I felt dizzy. Suddenly all the scattered pieces clicked into a perfect and repulsive picture. Clara's disheveled clothing, the smell of alcohol, the fact that they were together on a deserted highway at midnight. And now, this evidence. They weren't just together. They had gone to a hotel. They had been in a room. I looked up at the intensive care unit. Through the thick glass, 2 white beds, side by side. 2 still bodies, connected to machines, tubes and wires. 2 people whom, with these very hands, I had just snatched from death. I felt the bitter nausea rising in my throat. I stood up straight, leaning my back against the icy wall. But the cold I felt did not come from that wall, but from my own heart, which had turned to stone. The trembling disappeared, replaced by a terrifying calm. I didn't cry. I wasn't going to. Not now. I did not put those things back into the hospital bag. That would be my secret. I carefully put the receipt, the box, and the perfume into a separate compartment of my purse, closing the zipper firmly. Then I went out into the hallway. The silence was absolute. The long, almost endless corridor. At the end, an old yellow payphone. I walked toward it, step by step, with firmness and determination. I had to call Ryan, my poor son. He still didn't know anything. I put some quarters into the phone. The metallic sound echoed in the silence, and I slowly dialed the familiar numbers. Each ring resonated like a hammer blow in my chest. I almost wished he wouldn't answer, to gain a few more minutes before the final blow. But after the 4th ring, a sleepy, lazy voice brought me back to reality. "Hello? Mom? Why are you calling so early?" My son's voice, innocent, carefree. A sharp pain pierced my heart. I was about to destroy his world. I closed my eyes and forced my voice to sound calm, natural. "Ryan, I'm sorry to wake you. I just wanted to ask Clara if she managed to get the dried Anaheim peppers for the chili I'm making this weekend." A perfect excuse. An everyday question, one that any mother would ask. But for me, it was a test, a stone thrown into the water to observe the ripples of the lie. On the other side, Ryan let out a long yawn. "Oh, she's not home, Mum. Clara went to her mum's early yesterday. Her back pain came back. She'll probably be back late tonight." My chest ached so much I had to put my hand to my heart. A fluid lie. A story built, planned, rehearsed to cover a night of adultery. They had already prepared everything. They had already talked about it between them. And they used my own son as a shield. The cruelty of it took my breath away. I tried to keep my voice steady, even though my throat had dried up. "Oh, really? And your dad?" I was calling him all night and he didn't answer. "Dad left for Chicago early yesterday, Mum. He left a note on the table saying he was going to visit Mr. Smith, his friend from his army days. He said not to wait for him for dinner." Another lie. A perfect script. A wall built with deceit to protect their guilt. There were a few seconds of silence on the line. I could hear Ryan's calm breathing, the breathing of someone who suspected nothing, someone who lived in a castle of happiness built on sand. I took a deep breath. When I spoke again, my voice no longer had warmth. It sounded flat, cold and precise, like a nurse informing family about a patient's condition. Ryan, come to General Hospital immediately where Mum works. Go straight to the emergency room. The sudden change in my tone woke Ryan instantly. His voice became alarmed. Mum, are you okay? Did something happen to you? I'm fine, I replied, each word like a piece of ice. It's your dad and Clara. They were in a car accident. What? Ryan cried out over the phone, his voice cracking with shock and disbelief. An accident? But how could they be together? Dad is in Chicago, and Clara is at her grandmother's, isn't she? His innocent question was the final blow. I couldn't bear it anymore. Just come, Ryan. I need to talk to you. I said that and hung up, not giving him a chance to say anything else. My hand released the receiver, letting it swing from the coiled cord like a hanging body. Exactly 15 minutes later, Ryan burst into the hospital lobby like a hurricane. His hair was messy, his eyes wide with worry. He was still wearing his cotton pajamas under a hastily thrown-on jacket. Seeing him like that tore me apart inside. I didn't say anything. I just motioned for him to follow me. I led him to an empty consulting room, one of those where doctors usually give bad news. I slammed the door shut. The sound echoed in that small, silent space. I looked at my son, at the mixture of pure fear and confusion in his eyes. I knew that what I was about to do would change him forever. Without saying a word, I placed my purse on the metal table in the center of the room. I opened the zipper and slowly pulled out the things inside, one by one. The receipt for the Hidden Kiss Inn, an open box of condoms, and finally the small bottle of rose garden perfume, the gift he himself had chosen for Clara on their wedding anniversary. Ryan stared at the objects. His face went pale, then white as paper. He looked up at my face, which remained impassive. I began to speak, my voice monotonous, without emotion, telling him about the 5-hour surgery and how I had found those things in his father's jacket. No, he mumbled, shaking his head over and over. No, it can't be. There must be some mistake. My son started pacing back and forth across the room, running his hands through his hair. He was like a cornered animal, looking for a way out that didn't exist. Maybe, Clara finished up early at her grandmother's. She couldn't get a cab, and Dad went to pick her up. They just stopped at that hotel's restaurant for dinner. That's all. They just went for dinner. His explanations were so fragile, so sad. And this box of condoms, Ryan? My voice was an icy whip that cut through his desperation. Ryan stammered, his gaze lost. Maybe it belongs to someone who left it in Dad's car. Mum, you're overreacting. He pointed to the perfume bottle, as if it were his last lifeline. What about this? Maybe Dad bought it as a gift for you and didn't tell you. Of course. Maybe Dad liked the perfume Clara wears and asked her for help picking one out for you. I looked deep into my son's eyes. I didn't see rage, only an absolute desperation clinging to a shattered faith. He didn't want to believe it. He couldn't, because to do so meant his entire world would collapse. I didn't argue any further. It was useless. I silently put the evidence away, carefully placing it back in my purse, like a soldier storing their weapon after a battle whose outcome they already know. I understand, I said softly. That phrase seemed to drain Ryan of his last strength. He slumped into the chair, covering his head with his hands, and his body began to shake uncontrollably. I knew that, in that moment, in this war, I was alone. My son, shattered by the pain, had preferred to believe a perfect lie rather than face a terrifying truth. The next afternoon, when the sun's rays entered sideways through the hospital window, Clara was the first to wake up. I was sitting by her bed, with knitting needles in my hand, pretending to concentrate on a half-finished scarf. I heard a faint moan, then the rustle of the sheets. I didn't look up immediately. I wanted her to see me first. Clara's eyes opened slowly, still cloudy and disoriented after the deep sleep. She looked at the white ceiling, then the IV stand, trying to recognize reality. Her gaze wandered around the room until it stopped on me. For an instant, her eyes were completely blank. But immediately recognition gleamed, followed by a flash of pure horror. Her pupils contracted, her already pale face became almost transparent. Her dry lips moved, trying to utter something, but no sound came out. She looked like a cornered little animal, aware that the hunter was sitting right next to her. Calmly, I put the needles and the ball of yarn into the wicker basket. I smiled, a soft, warm smile, the same one I always gave my daughter-in-law. I stood up, walked to the bed, and naturally adjusted her pillow, being careful not to tangle her hair with the oxygen tube. My voice was calm, like when I talk to any frightened patient. "You're awake, Clara. Don't try to move too much. You have a broken femur." I paused and looked her straight in the eyes, which were wide with fear. "You and your father-in-law were in an accident, but luckily you are both out of danger, thank God." I pronounced the words, "and your father-in-law," with a very precise intention. I saw a shiver run through her, the fear in her eyes mixed with confusion. She didn't understand. My tenderness was more terrifying than any accusation. Hours later, Robert also woke up. His first reaction upon seeing me there, silently peeling an apple, was a visible start. His entire body tensed. He tried to sit up, but the pain from the head wound forced him to frown. "Angie," he murmured. "What? What happened?" I put down the knife and the apple slice and poured him a glass of water. I carefully placed the straw next to his lips. "You had a severe concussion to your head. Dr. Peterson said you need complete rest." I looked at him with a serene expression, with no more emotion than an attentive wife. "You and Clara were very lucky to survive." From then on, I began my performance. I cared for them with the dedication of a saint. I took Robert's blood pressure. I checked Clara's IV. I helped them drink sips of water, eat spoonfuls of soup. Every gesture was perfect, every movement measured, worthy of a head nurse, of an exemplary wife and mother. I didn't let a single crack show in my mask, not a look of resentment, not a word of venom. My calmness was the cruelest form of torture. I watched them, and when they thought I wasn't looking, I saw them exchanging furtive glances. They were quick looks, full of worry and suspicion. They were trying to communicate with each other in that silent language of accomplices, trying to figure out how much I knew. They were afraid, but my perfect care gave them a faint hope that maybe I still didn't know anything. That night, Ryan came in. My son's face was drawn, his eyes sunken from insomnia and pain. He looked at his wife, who lay weak in the hospital bed, and then at his father, his head bandaged. Doubt, love, and confusion wrestled in his eyes. I knew I had to act. I stood up, took him by the arm, and led him to the hallway, toward the noisy vending machine. I bought him a can of hot coffee and put it in his icy hand. I put my hand on his shoulder and let out a deep sigh, as if I had spent the whole day thinking and torturing myself. "Ryan," I began in a tired voice, "maybe your mother was wrong." My son's eyes lifted to mine, with a faint spark of hope. I continued, now with a voice full of guilt and regret. "That shift was too long and the shock was too great. Maybe I imagined things. All of that, perhaps, like you said, was just a misunderstanding." The spark in his eyes lit up again, bright. It was as if someone who was drowning had finally found a lifeline. You're right. It was probably just a terrible misunderstanding, I concluded firmly. Now, the most important thing is for them to recover. Don't tell your father or Clara that I found those things, okay? They've just come out of danger, and I don't want my mistakes or my confusion to break our family's peace again. Ryan didn't say anything. He dropped the can of coffee and threw himself into my arms. It was a strong, trembling hug, full of gratitude. I knew it, he whispered against my shoulder, his voice relieved, as if a weight had been lifted from his chest. I knew my mother would understand. You've always been the most sensible one. My son's embrace pierced my heart like 1,000 needles. I was lying to the flesh of my flesh, but I still patted his back, keeping my face serene and compassionate. I had to do it. For my plan to work, Ryan had to trust me completely. That night, after my shift, I didn't go home. That house had already become a stage for lies. I stayed alone in the empty hospital parking lot, looking up at the third-floor window, where their room was. The yellowish light shone faintly through the glass, a false warmth. They were in there, probably breathing a sigh of relief. They thought they were safe. They thought their disgusting secret had been buried under the facade of an unfortunate accident and the supposed confusion of an exhausted woman. But I wasn't going to allow it. This play would not end with a silent forgiveness within the hospital walls. It would end on a much larger stage, with everyone as witnesses. And I would be the director of their final act. A week of feigned calm passed. Under my care and Ryan's genuine concern, Robert and Clara recovered with surprising speed. They could already sit up, eat alone, and talk more often. Ryan was visibly happy. The poor guy believed the family had overcome the storm, that my words had dispelled any doubt, and those two were becoming more comfortable with my presence. They played their role as grateful victims, pretending to be a couple who just wanted to heal. Grateful to the wife and mother-in-law who had forgiven and cared for them. Our performance was perfect, except I knew very well that the ending would not be happy. The day they were to be discharged from the hospital arrived. By a twist of fate, Ryan had to work the night shift at the car factory, so I alone took care of the paperwork. I didn't complain. In fact, I felt relieved. I didn't want my son to witness anything else. I pushed Clara's wheelchair. Her leg was still in a white cast. Robert walked beside me with his wooden crutches, still limping slightly. We looked like a family who had just gone through a misfortune and were now supporting each other to move forward. A picture so moving it was ridiculous. We moved slowly toward the hospital cashier in the main lobby, which was full of people. The cashier was a young woman named Sophie, with a delicate face and large, round, bright eyes. I knew her. Sophie had been working there for almost a year. She was fast and always very respectful. She received the folder of documents from my hands. She smiled at me and said, "Good morning, Mrs. Angie," before starting to review the papers. But when she looked up to compare the information with the patient's, the smile vanished from her face. Her delicate eyebrows furrowed visibly. Her gaze moved from Robert's face to Clara's, and then to me, with a clear expression of confusion and doubt. Her reaction did not go unnoticed by me, and it seemed the other two noticed it too. I saw Clara, by reflex, lower her head slightly and tightly grip the arms of the wheelchair. Robert coughed uncomfortably and looked away, pretending to watch the people coming and going through the main door. Their awkwardness was a mute confession. Sophie quickly regained her professional demeanor. She lowered her head and focused on the computer. The sound of the keys echoed on the counter. "The total is done. I wish you a speedy recovery." Her voice sounded a little mechanical. I thanked her, and then I turned to Robert. taking some cash out of my wallet. I already paid most of it with a card. This is so you can take a taxi and leave sooner. I have to stay to hand over my afternoon shift. I'll go home later. I could see the relief shining in their eyes. The idea of not having to share the ride with me seemed like immense liberation. Robert nodded repeatedly. He quickly took the money and immediately helped Clara get up. Together they slowly moved toward the main exit. They walked as if they were fleeing. I stood motionless in front of the counter, watching their backs until they disappeared through the automatic glass doors. Then I slowly turned to Sophie's station. She pretended to organize a pile of invoices, but I knew she was waiting for me. A certain uneasiness was still noticeable in her large, round eyes. I smiled kindly at her, that cordial smile of a head nurse that everyone in the hospital knew. "Is something wrong, Sophie? I saw you look a little surprised when you looked at them just now." The girl hesitated, clasping her hands. I'm not sure, Mrs. Angie. I'm afraid I might be mistaken, but I think I've seen them before, not as patients." I remained silent, waiting patiently. My intuition told me that this was not a simple mistake. Seeing that I wasn't pressuring her, Sophie took a deep breath and continued, lowering her voice as if afraid someone might hear her. "Exactly 1 week ago, on Tuesday, around noon, it was the same day as the accident. That day, I was on my lunch break at the taco stand, just across from the hospital's main entrance, and I saw them." She paused, trying to remember. "I remember it perfectly because the gentleman's leather jacket was very nice and stylish. I even thought it would be great if my boyfriend had one like it." My heart leaped. The day of the accident. At noon, the leather jacket. Everything matched. "What were they doing, dear?" I asked her, trying to keep my voice as natural as possible, as if I only felt a passing curiosity. "I saw them leaving a jewelry store, Doctor. The Eternal Jewel shop, right next to the taco stand," Sophie recounted. The memory seemed to project clearly in her mind. The girl looked very happy, very pleased. I even saw her wrap her arms around the gentleman's neck, stand on her tiptoes, and say something to him while laughing. They looked very, very close. The girl hesitated, searching for the right word. At the time, I thought they were a young couple buying engagement rings or an anniversary gift. They truly looked in love. So when I read on the medical file that their relationship was father-in-law and daughter-in-law, I was surprised and felt a little uncomfortable. A key piece, a piece I was completely unaware of, clicked into place with cruel perfection. Before going to the hotel, before giving themselves over to forbidden pleasure, they had gone shopping to buy jewelry, the gift of betrayal. A rush of icy rage went down my spine, but I kept the smile on my face. "Oh, you must have mistaken them for someone else. It's not uncommon for a father-in-law and his daughter-in-law to go out to buy a gift for the son," I replied calmly, easing the girl's discomfort. "Thank you, Sophie. You can go back to your work." I turned and walked away, leaving Sophie with an expression still full of doubts. I didn't go back to the nurse's station. I didn't go to hand over my shift. Instead of going up, I turned around and took the path to the stairs leading to the basement. Down there, in that damp space, impregnated with the smell of dust and old papers, was the domain of the security department. Sean, the head of security, was sitting in front of a row of black and white monitors. His severe face was illuminated by the dim light. He was a middle-aged man, reserved but reliable. I had taken care of his mother the previous year, when she went through a serious illness that almost killed her. He told me then that he owed me a favor, and I knew the day had come to collect it. Hearing my footsteps, he looked up. "Good afternoon, Dr. Angie," he greeted with a slight nod of his head. His voice was deep and gruff. "Sean," I said. and went straight to the point. I need you to help me with something. I already had a lie prepared. I think I lost a very special earring near the main entrance last Tuesday afternoon. It's very important to me. Could you check the security cameras for that time? I just want to see if it fell on the sidewalk. I knew it was a clumsy lie, but Sean didn't ask any questions. His look reflected understanding, as if he sensed that it wasn't about a simple earring. He just nodded. Of course, Angie. No problem. He turned his chair and began to rewind the recording from camera number 4, the one with the widest angle that showed the entire hospital entrance and the sidewalk on the other side of the street, where the taco stand and the jewelry store were. We remained silent, staring at the screen. The images were blurry, black and white. People and cars moved like soulless shadows. The humming of the equipment was the only sound in the room. Tuesday afternoon. Around what time, Doctor? Sean asked. Around 1 o'clock, I replied, feeling my heart beating hard in my chest. He nodded and skillfully moved the mouse. Then he stopped. Here it is, 1:17. He pointed to a corner of the monitor. A black family sedan slowly pulled up to the curb. It was Robert's car, the same one I cleaned every weekend. I felt a knot in my stomach. Robert got out of the driver's seat. He didn't head for the hospital like any number of visitors would. He calmly walked around the front of the car, elegant, courteous, and opened the passenger door. Clara descended. Even with the black and white image, with the visual noise, I recognized the floral dress that I would later see torn and blood-stained in the operating room. A brutal contradiction between the feigned beauty and the atrocious truth. They did not enter the hospital. They crossed the street, heading to the other side. Robert's gestures were attentive, gentlemanly, considerate. When a motorcycle sped by, he raised his hand to shield Clara, a protective, theatrical gesture. They did not look like father-in-law and daughter-in-law. They looked like a couple in love. And they walked directly into the Eternal jewelry store, just as Sophie had said. Should I fast-forward the video? Sean whispered. I nodded, unable to utter a word. He fast-forwarded the recording. About 20 minutes later, the store's glass door opened again. They came out and stopped under the awning. In Clara's hand was a small red velvet box. She opened it, looked down inside, and smiled, a radiant, satisfied smile. And then, the scene Sophie had described appeared before my eyes, sharp and painful like 1,000 stabs. Clara closed the box and put it in her purse. Then, in a way as natural as it was unexpected, she put both arms around Robert's neck, stood on her tiptoes, and whispered something in his ear. Robert laughed out loud, wrapped his arms around her waist, and pulled her close to his body. For a brief moment, under the afternoon sun in Los Angeles, they looked like a couple lost in the intoxication of love. A wave of icy anger rose in my chest, burning like acid. My hand, resting on my thigh, had clenched into a fist without me realizing it. Could you copy this video onto a flash drive for me, Sean? My voice was almost a whisper, hoarse with contained emotion. The whole segment, from when they arrived until they left. Sean looked at me, then back at the image of the two embracing on the screen. His gaze no longer showed curiosity, but deep compassion. He didn't say another word. All right, Angie. Wait for me a few minutes. I held the small flash drive in my hand, feeling it was a cold, sharp weapon. It wasn't just a video. It was irrefutable proof. It was my bullet. On the way home, I passed the street in front of the hospital. I saw the Eternal Jewel sign. An irresistible urge made me stop the car and go in. The door chimes rang. A young saleswoman greeted me with a smile. I pretended to look at some necklaces in the display case, and in the most casual tone I could manage, I asked, "Last week, on Tuesday afternoon, an older gentleman came in, accompanied by a young woman to buy a very special gift. I'm just curious, because they looked very affectionate." The saleswoman let out a little laugh, amused. "Oh, are you talking about Mr. Robert? I certainly remember. He commissioned a white gold bracelet with a very delicate design. It had the text, 'My Sunshine,' engraved on it." She paused, her eyes dreamy. "He said it was an early birthday gift for someone very important to him. So romantic." My throat closed up. I forced myself to maintain the smile. "Really? My sunshine." I thanked her and quickly left the store. The air outside seemed not enough to breathe. I sat in the car, my hands gripping the steering wheel. My sunshine. My son Ryan had called his wife that ever since they started dating. This betrayal was crueler than I ever imagined. Not only were they deceiving us behind our backs, they were also stealing the most intimate, most sacred part of my son to turn it into a game within their sick relationship. The rage I felt transformed into something different, colder, more dangerous. It was pure fury. That night, during the first family dinner since they left the hospital, the atmosphere in the kitchen was uncomfortably forced. Ryan was doing everything he could to mend things. He kept talking and smiling, serving food repeatedly onto his wife's and father's plates, trying to create a semblance of happiness that he desperately longed for. Robert and Clara just lowered their heads and ate. They occasionally exchanged furtive glances and then watched me, cautiously. They lived in a mixture of temporary relief and latent fear. I slowly put down my fork and knife. The slight sound they made upon touching the plate broke the silence. All eyes were on me. I smiled, with the warmth of a mother, of a wife. "It's almost Clara's 30th birthday, isn't it?" "An important milestone in a person's life," I said cheerfully. "What if we throw a big party for her? I think we should invite the neighbors and her closest friends and give her a spectacular surprise." Ryan's face immediately lit up. The tiredness and shadow in his expression disappeared, replaced by genuine excitement. "That's a great idea, Mum. Clara will love it. She's been complaining lately that everything is too boring." Clara feigned shyness, a slight false blush on her cheeks. "It's not necessary, Mum. It would be a bother for everyone." But I clearly saw the impossible-to-hide joy in her eyes. A big party, where she would be the center, the queen. That was exactly what she had always wanted. Robert also nodded, saying it was an excellent idea to celebrate that they had overcome their misfortune. A few days later, when the house seemed to have returned to normal, I began the second phase of my plan. During dinner, while everyone was talking animatedly about the guest list, I suddenly let out a sigh laden with regret and guilt. "Oh my God, I just remembered something important." Everyone looked at me. The atmosphere tensed. "Mrs. Betty, my best friend since I was young, who lives in New York City, is coming to California for a week. She's only staying for 2 days. And unfortunately, one of those days falls exactly on Clara's birthday." I said this with a tone of discomfort. Then I added, in an even more apologetic voice, "I haven't seen her in over 10 years. If I don't go this time, we might not get another chance. Ryan, could you drive me? It would only be for the day. We'd leave early, see her for a bit, and come back late at night." Clear disappointment was visible on Ryan's face. "But that means I would miss Clara's birthday. I wanted to stay to surprise her." At that moment, I took Clara's hand, looking at her tenderly. "Forgive me, dear. How about we have the surprise party a day later, on Sunday? That way more people can come. And on your actual birthday, you and your dad can stay quietly at home to rest." I don't want you to get tired." Clara, suspecting nothing, immediately waved her hands, perfectly playing the role of the affectionate and understanding daughter-in-law. "It's okay, Mum. Go, don't worry. Friends are important. We can celebrate later. Just being home with Dad makes me happy." I quickly glanced at Robert. He was still leaning over his bowl, sipping soup, but I saw an almost imperceptible smile forming at the corner of his lips. The prey had swallowed not just the hook, but the line too. They believed that luck was smiling on them, that I, unintentionally, had given them a golden opportunity to spend an entire day together, without interruptions. That night, something told me I shouldn't sleep. Close to midnight, when the whole house was silent, I heard the door to Robert's bedroom softly open. I held my breath. I heard cautious steps, almost imperceptible, heading toward the backyard, where there was a table and chairs under the bougainvillea. I carefully slipped into the living room, and without making a sound, I slightly parted the curtain to look outside. A while later, just as I imagined, the door to Ryan and Clara's room opened. Clara, in a very fine silk nightgown, tiptoed out to the patio. In the dim moonlight, I couldn't hear what they were saying. I only saw the shadows of their heads together, and occasionally muffled laughter. They were planning their special day. I knew I had to act immediately. The next morning, when Ryan had already left for work and the other two invented the excuse of going shopping to have time alone, I called Max. He was the son of a patient whose life I had saved years ago, and now he installed security systems. He owed me a favor. I asked him to place tiny microphones, the kind that are almost impossible to detect. He installed one under the coffee table in the living room. He hid another one behind the lush flower pot with the pothos plant in the backyard. And the most sophisticated one of all, he perfectly camouflaged inside the digital alarm clock on Ryan and his wife's nightstand. I lied to Max, telling him that the neighborhood security had been bad lately, and I wanted to prevent burglaries while I was away. He didn't ask any more questions. I couldn't sleep that night. When I was sure everyone was asleep, I put on the wireless headphones and connected them to the device. And then I heard it. Robert's whispering voice, captured from the backyard microphone. "Even the heavens are on our side. The old woman and the idiot son left the way clear for us to enjoy a whole day together." Clara let out a sharp laugh, with a brazenly flirtatious tone. "And my gift, that my sunshine bracelet, wasn't enough to make me happy." Robert answered with a voice full of desire. "The real birthday gift is delivered at the right time and place. My love, everything is ready. A special gift in your room." I turned off the device, nausea rising in my throat. I already had everything I needed. The stage was set, the script was written, and the main actors were ready to perform their final act. The morning of Clara's birthday, the sky dawned strangely clear. I got up early and chose a sky blue floral dress, the prettiest one I owned. I put on light makeup, concealing the dark circles from so many sleepless nights. I had to look radiant, happy, at least for today. Ryan also woke up early. He was whistling as he buttoned his shirt, excited about the trip and the supposed surprise party that awaited him afterward. At 6 o'clock sharp, we left the house. Clara and Robert walked us to the door. Clara hugged me and whispered, "Take good care of yourself on the road, Mum." Robert patted Ryan on the shoulder. "Drive safely, son." They acted wonderfully, perfectly playing the worried roles of people concerned for their loved ones who were leaving on a trip. But when they thought we had already left, I looked at them in the rearview mirror and saw them exchange glances. A look charged with desire, complicity, and promises. They didn't know that small mirror reflected the beginning of their final scene. "Let's go to New York City, Mum," Ryan said enthusiastically. I smiled at him and put my hand on his. No, Ryan, we're not going anywhere. Surprise showed on his face. I didn't give him many explanations. I just told him, drive as I tell you. Our first destination was the city's most famous bakery, Three Milks. I went in and picked up the two-tier birthday cake I had ordered the previous week, decorated with buttercream roses and fresh strawberries. Ryan was still confused but didn't ask anything else. After that, we didn't leave the city. We drove through the neighborhood and stopped in front of Mrs. Johnson's house, the kind neighbor who lived right across from ours, at 9 o'clock in the morning. Her yard already looked like a small party. There were about 20 people, including close neighbors and some of Clara's intimate friends, whom I had secretly contacted by inventing a story about a big surprise Ryan wanted to give his wife. Everyone was there with gifts and smiles. I briefly explained to them that it was a surprise prank, that Ryan and I would pretend to leave so Clara would let her guard down. Everyone applauded and was enthusiastic about the idea. Only Ryan seemed a little confused, but seeing the excitement of the others, he eventually caught the bug. While everyone was talking animatedly, I slipped away to a corner of the patio, hidden behind a vine. I took out a tiny wireless earbud and carefully put it on. My hands were trembling slightly when I turned on the device connected to the recorder hidden in the alarm clock in their bedroom. At first, I only heard vague sounds, soft, romantic music, the clinking of glasses, laughter, Clara's whispers, her syrupy voice. Then the sound changed. It became clearer, more heavy, agitated breathing, impossible to disguise moans. And then Robert's deep voice, calling Clara by a name he should never have pronounced. My sunshine. You are my sunshine. My blood boiled. A burning rage rose to my throat. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath and forced myself to stay calm. This was the moment I had been waiting for. This was the signal. I took off the earbud and came out of the corner with a radiant smile. I signaled to the group. Is it time? Is everyone ready? Ryan carefully held the birthday cake. The others carried confetti and small gifts. We advanced stealthily like a small army, crossing the street toward our house, where a repulsive truth was unfolding. Ryan used his own key, gently opened the door, trying not to make a sound. Everyone held their breath, and we entered the living room. Then, at my signal, everyone shouted in unison, an exclamation that broke the guilt-laden air. Surprise, Clara! Silence fell instantly. Heavy, deadly. What they saw was not a happy, excited Clara in a pretty dress. On the big living room sofa, where they had apparently decided to change the scenery, a naked, disgusting scene unfolded. Robert and Clara, without a single stitch of clothing, tangled in an indecent position. Crash! The cake fell from Ryan's trembling hands and shattered on the floor, with cream and strawberries scattering like drops of blood. Ah! Cried one of Clara's friends. This was followed by horrified murmurs that soon turned into disgusted comments from the neighbors. Some, by reflex, raised their phones. Flashes burst, capturing that instant of humiliation. Clara, as if waking from a trance, grabbed a nearby blanket to cover herself. Her face pale with shock and fear, she screamed in a shrill, deranged voice. Who let you in? Turn those off! Get out of here, everyone! Robert, in the midst of the panic, did the most cowardly thing possible. He shoved Clara hard, leaving her completely naked in front of all those gazes, and he stammered as he pointed at her. No, it's not my fault. It was her. She seduced me. Me? I was forced. Hearing that accusation, Clara went berserk. Shame turned into fury. She screamed, started insulting, and listing all of Robert's faults without leaving a single one out. You disgusting old man. You said you loved me. You said you would give me everything. Where is the bracelet, my sunshine? Where are your promises now? They were accusing each other, humiliating each other, and ripping off their masks in front of everyone, right there in the house. In the middle of the chaos, Ryan fell to his knees on the floor, amidst the pieces of shattered cake. He clutched his head with his hands, trembling as if with a fever. His entire world, his family, his love, had collapsed before his eyes, in the cruelest and most public way possible. I slowly walked toward him. I didn't look at the other two. I sat down beside him among the debris. I placed my hand on his shoulder, a gentle but firm touch. Amidst Clara's screams and Robert's cowardly excuses, another sharp sound cut the air, interrupting the chaos. Police sirens. Mrs. Johnson, the kind neighbour, with the clarity of someone observing from outside, had called the authorities when she saw that the situation had completely spiraled out of control. 2 officers entered, with the tiredness and annoyance of those who have seen too much human misery. They looked at the scene. An older man with a towel hastily tied around his waist, a young woman crying under a thin sheet, the remnants of the birthday cake scattered on the floor as if they were evidence of a crime, and the group of neighbours murmuring around. Their looks were of pure weariness. They asked the onlookers to leave so they could take statements. The crowd slowly dispersed, but before leaving, everyone cast their final glances at Robert and Clara, a mixture of contempt, pity, and a hint of satisfaction. My stage had lowered the curtain, but the echo of that performance would resonate throughout the neighbourhood for a long time. I helped Ryan stand up. My son did not cry, did not scream. He remained silent, a silence more terrifying than any rage. His empty, lifeless gaze was fixed on the 2 people who were trying to dress themselves with shame under police supervision. He was watching those who were once his whole world, now reduced to 2 naked strangers, in every sense of the word. One of the officers asked us if we wanted to press charges for disturbing the peace. I shook my head and replied in an oddly calm voice, "It's not necessary, officer. I think the biggest punishment for them is what just happened. Public. Clear." When the police left, recording a family incident, the house sank into a thick silence, permeated with shame. Clara and Robert were in opposite corners of the living room, unable to look at us or at each other. Their forbidden love had died the moment it was exposed to the light. Finally, Ryan spoke. His voice was hoarse, empty, as cold as ash. "You have 15 minutes. Pick up the necessities and get out of here." Clara burst into tears desperately. She crawled toward him, trying to grab his leg. "Ryan, please forgive me. I made a mistake. He tricked me. I just—" Ryan took a step back, with a gesture of repulsion, as if about to touch something filthy. "Don't touch me." 3 words without hatred, only with absolute distance, more painful than 1,000 knives. The next morning, Ryan and I went to the lawyer's office together. We didn't talk much during the drive. My son drove with a vacant stare. I, in silence, watched out the window. We were no longer a family, but 2 survivors of a shipwreck. Our lawyer, Mr. Miller, was an old family friend. He looked at us with compassion and some sadness. I didn't beat around the bush. I placed the flash drive with the security camera video on the shiny wooden table. "We both want to file for unilateral divorce," I said firmly. "Here is the proof of infidelity." Mr. Miller connected the flash drive to the computer. He watched the video in silence, his eyebrows furrowed. Then he listened to me briefly recount what happened at the birthday party. He nodded, his face became serious. "With this, and the testimonies of over a dozen witnesses, everything will be resolved quickly and in your favor. The court processed the case faster than I imagined. Robert and Clara did not appeal. They had nothing to defend themselves with, not a single opportunity to justify themselves. The public humiliation had stripped them of all weapons. A few days later, they returned to the house to collect what was left of their things. Ryan and I deliberately went out. We didn't want to see their faces or breathe the same air as them. That afternoon, I ran into Mrs. Johnson at the grocery store. She took my hand, her eyes full of compassion. She told me she had seen them. They weren't together. Clara called a taxi and loaded her suitcases into the car alone. An hour later, Robert arrived driving his black sedan. He put a few cardboard boxes in the trunk and left without a word. Mrs. Johnson said they looked like two strangers who had just closed a fair deal, leaving the place that was once their home, each in a different direction, without saying goodbye. The news of the scandal spread like wildfire. From our small neighborhood, it reached the entire city of Los Angeles. Robert lost his job at the construction company. No one wanted to hire someone so discredited. Clara disappeared without a trace. It was said she had left the city. They vanished from our lives, leaving behind only a pile of ashes. I went to work my final shift at General Hospital. I left my resignation letter on the director's desk. He tried to convince me to stay, offering me a raise and fewer hours, but my decision was already made. That place, like that house, held too many painful memories. The emergency room, the operating room, the hallway where I discovered the truth, all were fragments that still tore at my heart. That night, Ryan and I sat in the middle of the empty living room. We had sold almost all the furniture, keeping only the essentials. The house now felt immense and icy. Ryan looked at me. For the first time in days, he really looked at me. His gaze was no longer empty. It contained a deep sadness and a tiny spark of hope. "Mum," he said in a hoarse voice, "should we leave here?" I nodded without hesitation. I put my hand on his, rough and firm. "Let's go, son, to a place where we can start over." 2 years have passed since we left Los Angeles, leaving behind the ruins of an old life. The small town of Santa Monica hides by the Pacific Ocean, far from the noise and toxic memories hundreds of miles away. The air here smells of salt and bougainvillea, and the sound of the sea, which never stops, cleanses the wounds of the soul. We used all our savings and the money from the house sale to open a small clinic. It is nothing more than a little white house with a pink bougainvillea trellis in front of the door, where we hung a wooden sign that reads, "Hope Clinic." It's not big or modern like General Hospital, just enough to treat the fishermen, farmers, and working families of the area. But for us, it is everything. I take care of the medical side, examining patients and prescribing medication. All those years of experience as a head nurse had given me a solid foundation. Ryan took care of everything else, the records, the medications, and especially tending the small green garden behind the clinic. My son had changed. He was thinner, his skin tanned by the sea wind, but the emptiness in his old gaze had disappeared, replaced by a deep peace. The scar on his heart was still there, I knew it, but it was no longer an open wound. What surprised and delighted me the most was that Ryan had a special soft spot for the little patients. Every time a child was afraid of an injection, he would appear and do clumsy coin tricks to distract them, or tell bad jokes until the tears turned into laughter. Seeing his sincere smile as he played with the children, I knew that his heart was healing, little by little. One afternoon, as the sun was setting into the sea, a young woman named Eve came running into the clinic with her 5-year-old son in her arms. The boy had a high fever, a red face, and a cough that shook his whole body. Eve was an art teacher, recently arrived in town to teach at the school. A single mother with eyes full of worry, but also strength. While I examined little Leo, I noticed Ryan quickly preparing a cup of chamomile tea for Eve and talking to her calmly to reassure her. "Don't worry so much. The boy will be fine. My mum is the best nurse I know," I heard him say with a warm, confident voice. After a few checkups, the boy fully recovered. A week later, Eve returned, but not for a consultation. She brought a small oil painting with her. She had painted our clinic, the little white house standing out under a pink bougainvillea vine, all wrapped in the golden light of the sunset. It was the most beautiful gift we had received. I started noticing that Ryan and Eve were talking more and more. I would see them sitting on the garden bench, talking about the books they both loved, or about how to care for a difficult plant. I saw Ryan laugh, a genuine, effortless laugh. That laugh I thought I would never see again since that fateful day. And one Sunday morning, I woke up and found a small lavender pot on the kitchen table, scenting the air with its soft fragrance. Next to it, a hastily written note. "Eve, Leo, and I went to the beach. I bought the sweet bread you like at the town bakery. Ryan." I smiled, a truly peaceful smile. I made a cup of coffee, took it to the back porch, and sat down to look at the garden Ryan had tended so carefully. My son had planted several rows of lavender, just like the one on the table, and its aroma floated in the fresh morning air. In the distance, the deep, prolonged sound of a fishing boat resonated from the sea. It no longer reminded me of the wail of an ambulance slicing through the night in Los Angeles. It was no longer the sound of death or of betrayal. Now, it is only the sound of life, of a new day beginning. I once used my own medical knowledge to save the two people who destroyed my family, and I don't regret it. Because if it hadn't been for that fateful night, if we hadn't gone through that total collapse, perhaps we would have remained trapped forever in a false happiness, and we would never have found the path to this true peace. Sometimes, to build something new, you have to agree to burn the past completely. And when I looked up and saw Ryan, Eve, and little Leo at the end of the path, walking hand in hand toward us, with their clear laughter resonating under the morning sun, I knew that hope, just like those lavender flowers, can always bloom even in the most barren earth. Our future is just beginning. From everything I have experienced, I understood something I want to share with anyone who is listening to this story. Sometimes in life, you have to face truths so painful they seem capable of destroying you. But it is the way you rise after that pain that determines who you will be for the rest of your life. Betrayal is not the end. It is only a cruel test for you to discover the value of self-love, peace, and the people who truly deserve to stay by your side. No one deserves for you to sacrifice your whole life just to maintain a home that is already rotten. Happiness is sometimes not about clinging on, but about daring to let go, about having the courage to step out of the darkness to regain the light, for yourself and for those you love. The story you just heard has had its names and places changed to protect the identity of the people involved. We are not telling it to judge, but with the hope that someone listens and stops to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own home? I truly wonder, if you were in my shoes, what would you do? Would you choose silence to maintain the peace? Or would you dare to face everything to regain your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story can become a candle that lights the way for someone else. God always blesses, and I am convinced that courage will lead us to better days. For now, on the final screen, I'll leave two of the channel's most beloved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.